Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 505 of Constructive Criticism. I'm joined by my co-host, Abe Stein.
That's me.
And the guy that, is a sweep just like the Timberwolves over the Suns, Mason Clark.
What?
It's a sweep. You're so good, it's a sweep.
I don't understand.
That's okay. That's why I did it that way.
It just means, Mason, that basketball is a sport that's played at a playoff level, and you're great, and compared to the Suns, the Timberwolves are great.
Oh. I watched the anime about basketball once.
Yeah.
Dude,
It's like Kuroko no Basket, but real.
Yeah.
That is legitimately my favorite text I've ever sent you. We've known each other for a long time, Mason, and the season of basketball anime is getting out of hand was my favorite.
It's a good one.
I've ever sent. Guys, we missed last week. It's good to be back. Today is, we're fresh off the Pro Tour. We're going to talk about Standard and the Pro Tour today. But I just want to check in. How you doing, Abe?
Honestly, we're on night 7 of Passover. I really just want to eat some bread. I miss it. It's just soft to the bite, and it's real nice. I don't know if you can tell, I've been thinking about food a lot, and specifically just like once you're on a diet where you can't eat a certain thing, you want it more. That's most of my headspace these days.
Okay. How's your life with bread, Mason?
Pretty good. Been kind of busy recently, but that's life.
Nice. Well, it's good to see you guys. Nice to check in. Let's check in with ourselves, a little more in depth with always improving. Abe, we're going to let you go first this week. Talk about what you've been doing to improve in Magic or life in general. Take us away, bud.
This weekend, I'm going to be playing the SCG Con in Richmond with 2 of my friends. Really, really excited for that event. And for preparing for that, I have been tasked with the Pioneer seat. This format I'll be playing. The last format I played was for the Pro Tour anyway, so pretty familiar, and it just shook out that way. But I've been working with some of the new Slick Shot red variants, and really taking the time to go beyond just the conventional knowledge of what's out there. If looking at Magic Online, I 5-0'd. Right when I started actually getting to the point of, okay, I've done my research, let's start playing, I 5-0'd with the Gruul list that had won the challenge the Saturday prior. And then when I was doing a little bit more follow-up research after playing enough to have an impression of that list, I realized that just about everyone was playing, doing what I just did. They copy-pasted that deck and then playing the same deck without really making any changes. In spite of the fact that list had some really interesting, one-ofs, and the numbers were really interesting, and decisions were clearly made by the deck builder, and it just showed there was room there, especially with an archetype that and a card defining the archetype that was so new, that there was a lot of room to do better than that and start thinking about the play patterns beyond that. So I actually went back and looked at, from RC Atlanta, my friend John Skennick had played a Picnic Ruiner mono red deck, and it operates a lot in the same space as Slick Shot, but obviously Slick Shot has it's a very different card than Picnic Ruiner and what it does, and got a chance to pick his brain a bit about what he's doing or what he would have done and what his takeaways were from playing his deck in Atlanta, and just starting to try to break new ground and push into the play patterns that I think will emerge this weekend from people playing the decks that are, talked about on Twitter, and people started playing them in their locals, and, having chances to copy paste deck lists on Magic Online to stay just that one step ahead of the curve. And that's just been really, really valuable. Trying things that normally I wouldn't get to try. It always helps when you start off with a entry point into what you think you're going to play, and it starts going well. I feel I have the freedom to really try some weird stuff, but really treating it with no sacred cows, and just changing things around until I get where I want to be. And so that's been going really well.
Awesome, I love to hear. I've also been playing a ton of that deck.
Yeah, we'll have to compare notes after the show.
I'll go next. I 2 weeks ago elected not to play an RCQ because I just wasn't feeling it, and I thought that was really cool. And then this week, I had to deal with health stuff, like some stuff that is like pretty big deal. For those who don't know, I have a degenerative eye disease, and I have to get cornea replacement in my right eye, and kind of dealing with that and things like that really made me take a look at my health overall and like things that I can do to improve. And it's funny, so much of the time, like I apply always improving to different aspects of my life, whether it's being a parent or it's my job. And I don't think that I've not since the pandemic ever really sat down and looked at my health and been like, okay, like where do I want to get, what's going on, and like what can I do. And yeah, it's humbling, and it's something that probably at this point in my life, at my age, is something that I really needed to happen. And it's funny because like I think that because I've applied this mindset to so many areas of my life, it was a pretty fast switch for what I knew, like steps that I needed to take, to the point where my wife was like, "Oh wow, you're doing this like really fast." I'm like, "Yeah, I think that sometimes when you need to do something and you need to make a decision on something, like health, and especially when you're going to like take this mindset of always improving into consideration for it, it's once you've made that decision, it's about taking action." We've kind of talked about that on the podcast in the past, and yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I know I'm being a little bit vague, but some of it's kind of personal. So maybe you had something to say.
I just wanted to say, I love that you're taking ownership of, the areas where you want to improve, and you're going to start putting in the work and hashtag always improving in that too. And I just love that for you. I'm glad it's moving forward.
Yeah, I get that. My always improving moment comes from really looking at the collector's cages decks in Pioneer over the last week. If you haven't seen this card, it's from the big score part of OTJ. And it basically says how to wave 5, and then you can put a counter on something, and after that counter resolves, you have 3 creatures with different power. You get to put the hideaway card, you get to cast it for free. It's pretty interesting. Players have been pretty hyped on it, doing stuff like Moonshaker Cavalry and Ulamog as the 2 big ones, Moonshaker being the white crater hoof. And in Pioneer, it's pretty interesting. When I was looking at it, though, I was pretty sure it was just terrible, because it has no interaction, and it's trying to race and doing things that are pretty much less powerful than all the other race decks. But I thought, well, it's probably worth looking at, so I watched some people play some games. I thought about maybe some ways to try to like help improve those problems, get some more like interaction in there, try also speeding the deck up a little bit. And, found some stuff that I was pretty happy with. Found the Turn Tempo Symbiosis land pretty quickly before other people had that, and just being like a green-white deck. And ultimately, I think the card is really strong, but the always moving moment kind of comes from like making sure just to kind of like do the due diligence and try weirder stuff, and also try to like correct for the error, right? Like one of the big things was like, I'm just playing like Lovestruck Beast and the new a Blade Splicer and things like that. So it's like, these are not weak cards, but they're not like what the format's about. So am I really actually going to win? And trying to solve for those problems instead of just being like, well, I'm just going to like give up on this, I think is a good sort of, lesson in this thing to work on. So that's my improving moment.
I love that, man. I had a similar moment today in Pioneer with Matt Kling. He's currently in the challenges we're recording, playing like the mono white, like a mono white diversion deck. That's a Yorion deck. And like when he sent it to me, I was like, I mean, this looks like nonsense. Like this looks so bad. And we did a league with it while I was working, and I was just wrong. Like the deck was way more cohesive than I thought it'd be. I think sometimes that those self check-ins are like really valuable because it makes you challenge yourself in new ways. So I love it, Mason. Awesome. Before we move on, I just want to give a shout out to our news patron, John. John, thank you so much for joining the show. John became a patron at $5 or more. We need to get access to the live shows, the Discord, the bonus episodes, all that good stuff. So thank you so much, John, and welcome. Some housekeeping. Just want to mention our sponsors. First one is Untapped.gg. Untapped.gg, if you use the link in the show notes, our affiliate link. Every sign up really helps the show out. And I highly recommend them. I use them all the freaking time. Like, literally, I if I'm on Arena, it is running. I never turn it off. It is great. I also have a premium account, and it was really cool to build sealed pool. Look at the sealed pools that it would build for me as I was looking at this new format and things like that. It just overall has some really great features, and I highly recommend it. And then our other sponsor is, of course, Heavy Play. Heavy Play is a premium accessories for card games like Magic the Gathering and Lorcana, stuff like that. And they are innovating in the space, and I love them. Like, I was thinking about giving away some of this stuff that I have sitting here, looking at the deck boxes and things like that. And one of the things that I really love that I don't think we've mentioned is just like how waterproof these deck boxes are, because they're made of like plastic instead of cardboard covered in pleather. And I have seen it already come up with drinks being spilled and people with their Heavy Play deck boxes at RCQs, and I love it. I just think that it's such a benefit that they think their deck is safe in one of those premium pleather deck boxes, and it's not always the case. Awesome. And don't forget to use the code CCMTG for 10% off at Heavy Play, and check them out at Heavy Play LLC everywhere. Okay, before we get started, I have a surprise. It's a surprise time for the Mason. Votes are in. Everyone voted, and 100% came back and said Mason needs to be left alone, and he can use his emojis on the show. How do you feel about this, Abe?
How do I feel about it?
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
You have to see that's what the results bring.
But I think this might do a better job.
Oh, okay. Okay, now we're all using the emojis.
This is so good for the podcast listeners. I'm glad.
For the Spotify listeners, for the iTunes listeners, for anyone listening on audio, this is just a reminder that you can go to YouTube and you can see these wonderful emojis that are taking up this minute of your airtime.
Mason, do you feel triumphant? Do you like...
No, I already knew everyone was going to agree, because it's just like free and fun. You're just a fun hater trying to hate fun.
Not a hater.
You're boo, that's you, thumbs down. Meanwhile, the people, thumbs up or one on the keyboard, depending on who you ask.
I love it. But Abe, why don't you talk to us about that? What are we talking about this week?
Yeah, so in case you have been living in a cave or under a rock, the Pro Tour was last weekend. It actually ended yesterday at the time of our recording. And we got to see Outlaws of Thunder Junction Limited, Outlaws of Thunder Junction Standard. We got to see one of the most dominant performances in Pro Tour history unfold. We got to see one of the greatest storylines in Pro Tour history unfold on the way to the end of that dominant performance. We got to see some rising stars of Magic, finally get their chance to break through on the big stage. It was honestly one of my favorite Pro Tours I've gotten to see, unfold in quite some time.
Yeah, I didn't get to watch as much as I would like. I was pretty busy with my kids, but I watched about, 5 or 6 rounds of Constructed, as well as, some of the draft rounds. But it was one thing that I'll say is I was texting my friends during the quarterfinals, the first quarterfinals match, and I was like, is this the longest match in Pro Tour history? It was over 2 hours.
I think there's one that's longer. I think I saw it on Twitter. Also, did Simon played 7 games last Pro Tour? How long was that one?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Because it was definitely a bit. Yep. Yeah, I think it's like the second longest one. I saw something on Twitter. I'll try and find it later.
Yeah, that's one of my things. Hey, so what did you feel about the kind of just the Pro Tour vibes?
I thought it was good. I thought there were a lot of really great matches. Echoing Abe, I think Ray and Jason have been really killing it. I know Ray better as CT Soft, but they sort of dominated with kind of a known archetype that they made, and people just didn't adapt with the new cards, and also create another archetype which put someone else into the top 8, which pretty impressive stuff. And then there were so many amazing matches, just like Javier versus Simon in round 15 was an Esper mirror that was really, really good. I was on vacation with my girlfriend, and we went to dinner, and our plan was to go to dinner so we could catch the last round of Swiss at the end. And while we're waiting to get seated, we pull up the thing because it's a 15-minute wait, and that match is playing, and we actually end up having it in the corner during the dinner, and it was so sick. We went back and watched it with more intent, and it was just good. And overall, it was just a really great matches of Magic being played, and a lot to learn from.
That's one of my favorite things about the Pro Tour, and it's actually advice that I've given a lot of times. I feel like so often people watch Magic to make themselves feel smart, or they'll be like, "Oh, I would have done this," or "I would have done this," rather than with the intent to learn from these great players being on the screen. And I had a moment this weekend where I think it was Simon versus Reed in Constructed, and on day 1, and it was just haymaker after haymaker, but the sequencing was so interesting to me that I took a mental note that I needed to go back and watch it again, because I just think that some of the sequencing in this standard format is really vital in both resolving your spells or having your threats stick around, or having the right cards at the right time, because the answers are so flexible, but then they all have those restrictions for the most part, so it's interesting.
Yeah, there was during the Javier versus Simon match, there's a point where I think Simon has been stuck on lands for a turn or two, and Javier has 5 with Simon tapped out and can play Bat God, Applesauce, excuse me, or can have 3 mana play plus hold up No More Lies, and was kind of ahead on board ever so slightly. And I was oh, we're probably just going to slam the Bat God here. Simon is already pretty behind on lands, so this No More Lies is going to be good for a long time, and the 3-drop is not going to fall off immediately. It's probably better just to get the Bat God down. And then Javier tanked for a second, and then just held up, played the 3-drop, held up the No More Lies, and it ended up playing out in a way where it would have been really hard, I think, to convert the No More Lies. And I don't know, it's one of those matches where it's almost I wish I could talk to Javier about what was going on in his head, because it was so interesting to see his decision making process in there. To me, it's almost nothing kills the Bat God. You get it down, you have the No More Lies, stop the Wandering Emperor, you're so far ahead. But he put such a premium on if it gets killed in some way, my Simon has so many cards in hand, this No More Lies is going to get stranded, and I might just lose on tempo swings. It was just really interesting, and there was a lot of that where it was oh, I wonder what Javier is going to do. Oh, he's just going to activate Fairy Mastermind. He's not going to cast a spell. So there's a lot of really cool, interesting sequencing stuff from great players all weekend.
Yeah. Well, before we dive too far in this, I just want to take a moment to congrats the winner. I'm going to butcher this name. Somebody else want to try?
Yoshihiko Ikawa.
There you go. Let's go, Abe. Let's go.
Yeah, and to kind of give some context to his run, I believe he lost 1 round of draft, and that's it.
According to this, he went 10-0.
Yeah, I believe he lost 1 round of limited to Javier, went 5-1 in draft, and then won. I don't think he played all. He didn't play all 10 rounds. I think he won what? Then
he won round 12.
Went 8-0.
Yeah,
he went 8-0, and he ended the tournament. Well, ended his Swiss tournament at 13-1, and then won his 3 matches in top 8 and won the Pro Tour. So that's I can't think of that one Pro Tour where LSV ran the tables constructed all the way to the finals or something with Naya Lightsaber. But other than that, I can't think of something nearly that dominant, especially not in the era that we're in. And it's kind of funny to have gone through the standard RSQ season we went through, where it was Domain, it's too good, no one can beat it, and then seeing that wasn't true, but then to see the Pro Tour for Thunder Junction be absolutely dominated by this Domain deck.
Yeah, I also thought his deck was, there were a couple of innovations that I was talking about with my friends during the Pro Tour, and one of the things that we all agreed on is how important Recruiter had become as a way to both close out games really quickly, and then also the both close out games really quickly and also like win the mirror in a lot of cases where you can just like double spell and be like, okay, this one's over. I was impressed. I've played a lot of this deck the last day and a half. You know, I think I'm over 13 matches in with the deck, and I think a lot of it's really interesting. You know, going away from things like the invasion and saying like, okay, I want to be a little bit faster, so I'm going to play a one-up glimpse, and then I want to make sure that like I don't ever that I don't run out of basics. So I'm playing cartographer survey. Like this is like, I know it's like minutia, but like it's pretty important minutia in my opinion.
Yeah, cartographer survey letting you find cavern against the counterspell decks is pretty huge. Like it is a much higher variance card than invasion, but you know, like Spencer said, like not running out of basics and being able to find those lands like Cavern of Souls, just such a huge thing. So yeah, it's really interesting. I also love how like just in general, it seems like domain players moved away from up the beanstalk and like as a 4 of saw a couple 2s, some 3s, but just like not being married to such like a, you know, clearly powerful card. I think is really like, you know, telling, and just in general, you know, as like the common us commoners get our hands on decks, we like make them more dull, and pros every time they play keep them a lot sharper, right? Like they have all this like Spencer mentioned, one glimpse the core, one long goodbye, one guitar survey, you know, and like I saw people even talking about like, yeah, I'm gonna like, you know, cut this and put in the 4th, you know, up the beanstalk or whatever. Where like Minguchi's list had 4 of the enchantment that like makes a mana and then you gain a life for every color of spell in the first play you cast each turn, and like, you know, like then being like, oh, that's not actually that good, you should just play like these other things. And it's like, I don't know, like there's probably a lot of room to explore in your 5-color ramp deck that has all these tools.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the data on the results for Domain, Ikawa was the only one who really did well with Domain. I think on the whole, the archetype posted like 50-50. And when you have a player who goes like, right, runs the table 8-0 in that sample, like it feels like you should probably be doing better as a whole in 50-50. And I think that speaks a lot to not only just understanding and very intentionally building the deck, but understanding all of the sideboard plans, having everything like hammered out to the detail, which is something I think we've been saying about Standard for a while now, especially in regards to the Domain deck, is that if you are a player who has a Domain list that is in tune with the format and what it's going to be like, what's going to be important, what the game plans are going to be, and how your cards link together, like the deck is definitely one of, if not the best deck in Standard. But doing that is very, very difficult, and especially when there are still decks that can get under... There's a ton of different ways the deck can get attacked, and if people choose to do too many of those, you can't really cover all your bases. And really, like in this weekend, Ikawa really did such a fantastic job of having the perfect deck for the Pro Tour. It's hard to argue that it was anything but the perfect deck.
Yeah, I think about like, you know, just to kind of mention some of the decks that it struggled with this weekend outside of his hands. You know, you think about the teamer deck that he did in fact beat it in top
4.
Okay.
Top 8, excuse me. Playing for top 4 is what I meant.
Playing for top 4.
Yeah.
I think that like the sideboard plans were so clean, but I also wonder like, is there pivoting that things like, you know, once you now have this like very well established deck list that it becomes the stock deck because of things like this for in a lot of cases. You know, what is something like Team Random List that supposedly has a very good matchup here? Like, what does it do?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I also think like one of the things that was really good at this deck was just like how good its Esper matchup is. And if you saw the Pro Tour, it was 31.4% of the field was Esper, 65 players. It was a smaller Pro Tour. A lot of people ended up deferring. But it's still like, let's say, a third of the field is basically Esper. And that matchup is quite good for them. And, you know, I think the way Ikawa built the deck as well also helps with being good against Esper, things like Long Goodbye in the main deck, sort of a nod in that direction, as well as helping, you know, because that's not even like that great of a card against Convoke, you know, like it's not really good against traditional aggro decks. It's fine. But yeah, I think it was a really good choice, and I'm going to be interested to see, because I think, you know, like Abe mentioned, going into the RCQ grinding season and the everything, it was like, oh, Domain's the deck to beat, and people were like, oh, actually we can beat Domain. You know, like if we want to, we can. And so now it's going to be interesting to see like how are people going to respond, because whenever a deck wins a Pro Tour, a lot of people just lock that in no matter what. And it's going to be interesting to see sort of like how are people adapt to this while also fighting all these other decks, because any of these decks, I think that top 8 could have very easily won. They were all incredibly well built and played by extremely good players. So like I think we're in for a really big treat coming Dallas in just 3 weeks. 3+ weeks.
Abe, is there anything you think about some of the other top performing decks that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, like Mason said, all of the decks in the top 8 and even beyond it. Like a lot of deck lists were just amazing to look at, and there was a lot of real like elegant and silent innovation in a lot of spaces. One that I really want to highlight, and a deck that I think is like, as much as I think the Domain deck was great, and I obviously CFT Sock and Jason, Ray and Jason both did fantastic work with the 4-color Legends deck, the Slowgurk deck, and I mean, Ray even kind of inventing the analyst archetype to win the Chicago event that qualified them for this Pro Tour is the Jund analyst deck that a couple of players brought, which kind of, like, I think is probably one of the most innovative things that came out of this PT, outside of like the brews and things like that, was just taking the existing archetype and pushing it one step further. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the archetype, but for the listeners, it kind of takes the shell of the Aftermath Analyst, Nissa, Splendid Reclamation, Landfall stuff with World Souls Raiders and Endgame, and replaces the like Memory Deluges and the elements of, kind of true combo finishing with the Green Virtue, to instead have this like much more resilient game plan of using some cards from the new set in Pillage the Bog to be really, really consistent. I mean, it'll just like, a deck like this, where you're ramping as much as you do with Analyst and Reclamation, you often are just able to look at 16 plus cards to find the card you're looking for, as well as like Pitiless Carnage to give you more mana producing lands to get back with your Splendid Reclamations, while also drawing cards and getting to play a lot of the tools that are necessary to fight against kind of the decks this archetype struggles with, by playing all the black removal and discard interaction. So this is like, I actually love the way this deck was built, and I probably won't shut up about it much, and I will play it, and it's like my front runner for like if the RC was tomorrow, or I got to go play the Pro Tour and everyone knew what happened in this one, like another Pro Tour tomorrow, I would probably play this deck. But yeah, there's just so much that I haven't had a chance to dig into in every single deck list to read over, and I think it's just great. I
can't imagine being the first person to cast Pitiless Carnage in this deck, and then Reclamation them back, and then with an Nissa in play, and your opponent being like, "Oh my gosh, what just happened to me?"
Yeah, you're going from Scapeshift to like, I don't know. You're like, I was watching my friend play some games this yesterday in preparation for Richmond, and we were talking through. I was like, "Oh yeah, we'll just plot this Carnage, and then when they tap out, we can just like float 8, Carnage it away, crack the Analyst. We have a Splunking in play. Now we have like 30 mana, and we drew 8 cards, and like." Now, whatever else we do this turn, if they have some way to interact, even if they leave up some mana, like if they have no more lives at some point in this on one of our spells, as long as we wind up with like 6 lands in play, we just drew 8 cards. Like it's kind of unreasonable how good some of the lines are, and how much it takes cards that like really were asking to be powerful and to be used, and seeing them succeed in that.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I thought it was funny because you were like, they took the Virtue to remove the combo. And in my head, I was like, well, they kind of just shifted the combo. Like they kind of had this like value card that also combos instead of being so rigid in the late game part of it, which is pretty interesting to see that too, because you don't have to go all in, right? Like you can just sort of sack a few things. So I think that deck is great.
Mason, talk to me about this 4-color Legends deck. We've already mentioned it a few times.
Yeah, so this is Jason and Ray's deck. Slowgurk, we talked about back when the RCQ season was happening, but this is basically the modern day Slowgurk deck. It is still a mid-range deck that has a few combos and has like a lot of mana efficiency. It abuses, Takenuma and Odawara and Boseiju a lot, just with the Legends discount. NT plus Rona is such a powerful draw engine for this deck and move through so much, and has just a couple of various like weird combos. So like one of them is Honest Rustian and Vile Smasher. You can kind of like loop and then kill your opponent by Legend ruling Honest Rustian and picking them up. And with Relic of Legends, it's actually like just doable. And Honest Rustian is like a card you just actually want to play. Like it is just good in your deck. So it's very nice where it's kind of like they sort of get this ability to critically hit somebody with a Vile Smasher, which is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, which is like having, we talk about this a lot on the show, right? The difference between 0 and 1 is like way bigger than any other number difference in Magic, right? Like if something costs 0 mana, costs 1 mana, it's actually the world, right? And like the ability to have this one Vile Smasher in this deck and sort of like, yeah, like we could play like another legendary creature, like maybe another Tiny Bones or something, but like we can just loop this away. It's a fine body, and it gives us this Oops, I Win button. And because our deck either curves out and kills people, right, by going like NT and to slow Gurk and to just like pressure and back it up with some removal, or I like, play these long graded games and I eventually just assemble this weird combo by just playing the game naturally. I don't have to work for it. You combine that all with slow Gurk's ability to abuse these lands and also be like an unkillable threat in a lot of matchups. And it just leads to a deck that's very well built, extremely tuned for matchups. Like it is clear they put a ton of time and effort and got rewarded heavily. It's just an incredible deck.
I mean, and it's not just that, right? Like the deck overall was one of the better performing decks and really only had, a rough. I mean, if you look at the small sample size.
Well, so the thing is, Jason and Ray worked with Sanctum. Of the 16 Sanctum players, 15 played 4-color Legends. So everyone on the team but one, which is all but 2 of the Gurk players at the Pro Tour. There were only 17. So, I mean, like, there was some other people, right? I don't want to discredit them, but I do think the majority of the results are from that hard work. And I do want to, give a shout out to the team as well. Like, I am sure, Jason and Ray like led the charge on this, but I am positive other members of the team contributed and probably helped wrangle in some maybe some like crazier ideas, right? Like we've seen these players play things like 76 cards or whatever, like they're willing to really explore, and that's what I really love about them and wanted to highlight. Like those players are like basically saying you all have thought these things for a long time, but how true are they actually, and have been challenging them for basically a year and a half and have been continuously succeeding, and it's really inspiring and it's really thought-provoking. So
the thing that I love about this deck is you talked about Takenuma, but like just kind of playing this format a lot. Having to play something like 3 Boseijus in my deck is like pretty insane. As a spell land, I know that it does Takenuma too, but it is like in a lot of cases outside of Tidebinder uncounterable, and just I think that this deck is one that forces your opponent to aggressively use things like its Leyline Bindings or other decks to use enchantment removal, and just having 1 mana answers to that also produce mana. I think it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, seeing this deck kind of come to be what it is, and like the different lessons that like Magic players learned really quickly about some of the things, like back like a year ago now, when Esper Legends was like the best deck in Standard. It was like, oh, what really makes this deck is that I get to play a high land count in my proactive deck because these Legends make my my channel lands significantly cheaper to the point where they're actually spells I want to play, or the land drops I need to hit. That's something incorporated in this 4-color Legends deck. Like, Relic of Legends being like Cryptolith Rite, very powerful card. Relic of Legends is better in this deck than Cryptolith Rite would be. And just finding ways to, again, cheat on mana and find ways to gain value. We've seen Inti and Smuggler's Copter, and Inti just in general be a card that has taken a lot of space in Pioneer. Finding a way to use that, and Rona, another card that had a lot of potential. Really taking all of these cards that individually took a lot of hours for the Magic community to really understand how they work and where they apply best, and then finding ways to combine all of it under one roof in this deck is like, I think it's really a testament to just how much I personally believe that like players like Jason and Ray are like absolutely the future of Pro Magic, and they're like, I think in ways further ahead than most everyone else in terms of the way that they're engaging with the game and how seriously they're taking it and how innovative they are in their deck building. And like I got to experience that firsthand working with Jason for for the last Pro Tour, where like between Jason and Kane and some other ideas in the camp, like it kind of came together in the Jessica Creativity deck we played. But like seeing Jason's process up close and then seeing its performance was just like, it really was inspiring to me to see just like how clean a process someone who prior to that really didn't have much Pro Tour experience had. And even in an era where like, we've had setbacks in Pro Magic for like 4 years now, and we're just starting to hit in the upswing, seeing players who really in that time continued to hone the craft and get better, and seeing them succeed at the stage was not only unsurprising to me, but it was inspiring to me to see like people still care this much, and like decks like this that like it makes you go, wow, like how did they come up with this? And the answer is really that they're putting in the time and coming to really good conclusions. So I do also want to echo what you said, Mason. Just a big shout out to that.
How do you feel about this statement, Mason? 33% of players played Esper midrange. It had a 49.4 win percentage at the Pro Tour.
Reasonable, right? Like, I think there are a lot of things going on. Like, one thing to sort of like think about when you're thinking about the deck selection, I brought this up in like my personal Discord when some people were like, I was kind of hoping to see some cool decks or whatever at the Pro Tour. Little did they know what was coming, but like when we saw the Esper data, it's like there's 2 weeks from like when the set drops to the Pro Tour for OTJ. I think it's going to be 3 for MH3, right? Like it is not a lot of time, and you have to learn limited. You don't top eight a Pro Tour without like either an absolutely broken constructed deck and like at least a good understanding of limited. So like you have to like be able to like 5-1-6-0 a draft, which means a lot of your time gets taken away. And Esper was really good before, and really, Concealed Courtyard was a huge get for the deck. The deck is very strong. It's proactive and puts people on the back foot while being able to play those longer games. I think Fairy Mastermind has proven itself to be one of the best cards in Standard. We're not even talking about Rafine, which is clearly just like the dominant 3-drop snowball card. We've seen cards like Gix that put up great results and are really strong, but like that card requires so much more than Rafine does. And Rafine costing the mana, but right now not that big a problem with all the mana we have. So I'm not surprised to see so many people play this deck. I think it is a very good and solid choice, and I'd be very happy to play this deck. A version of this deck tomorrow at an event. Like you can customize it. I don't think it's going to be the best choice every weekend, but I think it's always a safe choice.
Yeah, I mean, kind of looking at the data, I was surprised that it's only bad matchups on paper, from the weekend were 4-color Legends and Domain. I think that if you asked like blue-white control players if they thought they were like heavily favored going into this weekend versus this deck, they all would have said yes. And it produced a 50-50 win percentage against those decks.
Yeah, I think there's something to like, I think that's true. And I think a lot of Esper players hedge that way too. Not all of them, but like a fair number of people like had plans for that. And it is really interesting. And I don't know if any more have been released, but I just want to give a shout out to Simon Nielsen, who tweeted just the handshake like guide he wrote on like how to play Esper versus 4-color Legends. And talking about like the guide begins with like, before it's where Simon was playing the Legends deck for the team role, right? Like he was playing against the Esper players, and it's like flat out matchup's good for the Slowgurk player. You need to be aware, and then writes like a whole thing for free. So I want to give a huge shout out to Mr. Checklist Card Twitter. You can go read that. But yeah, this is a deck that I'm interested to see if it can adapt and beat those things and not fall so far behind against blue white, right? Because it's got the blue white matchup to even, but like can it hold that? And like there's a bunch of cards in the sideboard like Pest Control that are really good, in the Convoke matchup, but like they cost you in these other spots. So it's gonna be interesting to see how players want to tune their Esper midrange deck going forward.
Is there any other decks that you'd like to cover before we kind of go on to our other questions?
I want to quickly talk about blue-white control for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, blue-white and Convoke, I think, are 2 decks that were around, but they got upgrades. I think 3 steps ahead. We kind of called in the set review. obviously a very strong card in standard. Did that Phantom Interface, another card I think Abe talked about, very strong. Obviously going to be pretty good in standard. And just seeing Utah's like approach, and like there's a lot of differing approaches too. Like, not everyone just played the same deck list that Utah played, but I think Blue White Control is quite good. And it's one of those things that needs to tune, and it's a lot better when people don't know the deck exists. But it's a very solid deck. And Spencer, I know you've played this deck a lot before, so is there anything you want to say about it?
Yeah, I actually really, really like the Utah's list. I think there are a couple things. We were doing some testing this weekend. While I didn't get to go play RCQs because I was dealing with family stuff and health stuff, I did get to do some testing and talking with some people that I trust. And the thing that we talked about with this deck specifically is how important having a turn 2 counterspell was to Yuta, and what he thinks the format's about. Because what does that tell you he thinks the format's about? And I think that it tells you that he thinks it's about not letting people get on board early against you, not letting anything happen early. And I mean, it's a lot, right? Like just for those who don't know, if you're listening, it's 4 No More Lies, 1 Make Disappear, and 2 Phantom Interfaces, just in the 2 mana slot for interacting on turn 2, just for counter spells. He also has Get Lost and Deduce as 2 mana spells, and technically March of Otherworldly Light too if they play a 1-drop. It is abundantly clear that he cares about the earliest turns of the game, and I think that's great. The other thing that I really like about his deck list is actually in the sideboard. I actually think the Hullbreaker Horror is pretty important, and you get to do that now because of things like the way that the counter spells work. So one of the problems with Blue White before is you kind of had spells that needed to interact with something in order to do anything. So your Hullbreaker Horror didn't really work in those situations. But because of 3 steps ahead in Phantom Interface, now those cards actually can just be cast. They're not stuck in your hand waiting for your opponent to do something. And that makes Hullbreaker Horror a lot more appealing, not just in the mirror, but just as a card for this deck, which I thought was pretty ingenious.
Yeah, I really love what you pointed about the early game stuff. It's clear that he cared. Modern design has sort of trended in a way of hey, 3-drop's going to be sort of where things start getting the ball going. And it's just so clear that he just wants to have an answer no matter what. If he's on the draw, he wants to be able to wait to play his tap land on turn 3 and hold up on turn 2 an interaction spell. And he's on the play, he's going to be able to sort of get play that tap land on 3 this way and interact and curve out to the powerful 4s. And I think it's just really smart and makes a ton of sense, especially with cards like the Phantom, the Phantasmal, where it's it also just makes a 2/2, which is a removal spell. We talked about it winning you games in the set review. It is just also a blocker. It just, like a bad shark type thing.
I will say, just to kind of highlight something that you just said too, how important, just to hammer it home, look at the average mana cost of his sideboard. It is 2 Destroyables, 2-drop, 3 Negates, 2-drop, Filigree Salix, 2-drop, Unlicensed Search, 2-drop, temporary lock, the other 2 temporary lockdowns, 3 Tishana's Tidebinder, 3, and then it's a Hullbreaker Horror and a Boonbringer. This is a very cheap sideboard.
Yep. Got to interact in those early turns, and if he can get out of those early turns, he's going to win.
And it's not just about the early turns. It's also the mid game too, right? One of the things that happens a lot, and did happen a lot, especially before Deduce in Pioneer Blue White, which had a lot of the same cards and had a lot more of the depth that we see now in Standard, was that they get to turn 4, all the things they want to do are 4 mana, but they have the absorb problem, right? Also all the things they want to do are 3 mana, and what are they doing for the first 2 turns of the game? When their deck is all 2 mana interaction, they get the chance to now say, okay, I will counter your spell and Deduce, or I will counter spell and crack my clue, or I will leave up 4 mana, and I'm showing that you can't just cast 2 spells to get past me. You can't just end of turn of Virtue, make a token, and then untap and jam your Rafine and get through me that way if I was on the play. I'm going to have multiple ways to interact multiple times in the set of the turns, and then it starts to be on an axis of, can I run them out of answers? Which is exactly the kind of game they want to play, because they have more things to catch them up in that way. So it's the density there of having so many cheap plays just plays so well into what Blue White Control is trying to do, to the point where the amount of actual expensive spells they have, most of their spells wind up costing 2 more because they're leaving up counter magic, or they have other things to spend their mana on. But like Sunfall is where the buck stops. There's no Eighth Ring, there's no Sphinx's Revelation, there's no huge mana sinks. Even 3 steps ahead is typically only a 5 mana counterspell to get the full counterspell, draw 2, discard 1. Scaling it up more than that is pretty difficult to do, and it makes a deck that much better when it's able to spend its mana defensively and then slowly build the rest of its game plan around that, because it has so many cheap answers.
I agree with everything. I actually think this deck is built really well. Like, if you just look at we're going to probably say that a lot. These people, put their blood, sweat, and tears into these things, but I was really impressed with this one specifically, and got the chance to talk to people about it. You want to talk about Convoke? I have a deck that I wanted to talk about too, but I wanted to make sure that you got your other one.
Yeah, just really quick about Convoke. Did not do very well. I think that makes sense. I think a lot of people were gunning for it. It is the Esper and it were the clear okay, they got good cards. You need to be ready for them, right? Everyone talked about how the thing stopping this deck from being the best deck in the format was its mana was dog water. Well, Inspiring Vantage did a lot to help with that. And the deck didn't gain a lot besides just that, as far as I can tell here from a quick scan, basically the same deck, just with better mana. And that's good. Your best draws are really, really good. But I think this deck sort of falls into the reasonable gamer on the outside looking in, where it's there are going to be weekends where just people are going to have a bunch of pest controls. They're going to have the temporary lockdowns, and you're going to get got. And the time when no one's talking about Convoke is the time where you should be playing it. And right now, people still have a lot of respect for it, I think, going into this next weekend. So I think the deck is strong, but, didn't really change much.
I thought this deck was really, really good when Domain was the dominant deck. And I think that this deck struggles have stayed the same. And it feels like everybody has 3 mana sweepers. Everyone, their mom, their dog, their sister, their brother, their cousin, their YouTube comment person that hates them and always tells them that their hair looks bad. Every single one of them, all bring 3 mana sweepers, and that's just hard for this deck.
Yeah, for what it's worth, it is a 47.9%. It's in the middle here.
Okay,
it's 69 wins and 75 losses. So close, but
against. Oh no, I was talking about its matchup versus specifically Domain.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you were looking
at
the data.
Okay, the deck that I want to talk about, kind of as our last deck, is a deck that had 3 players have winning records with, and they're all playing the same 75. It's the CFP Golgari deck. And the reason that I want to highlight this deck is I think that we have shifted again in Magic, and I don't know that shift has been recognized yet. So this deck was really fun to watch. They all played, I believe, the exact same 75. And the card that I want to highlight in this Golgari list is 3 main deck Duress. And if you had asked me 2 years ago about this decision, I would have said it was crazy. Creatures had gotten too good. Main decking Duress in a format like Standard is asking to just 1 mana discard a card. And I think, kind of looking at the decks and looking at some of the key cards, bridge spells, key interaction points, protecting your stuff in a deck like this, the number of sweepers being played, I think this is a really good choice for trying to combat the way that the format looks while trying to be stay kind of in that middle game. And while none of them top 8'd, you had multiple 7/3s. I think either Sam Pardee or one of them lost, I think, a win and in for top 8. And I don't know. I'm impressed with the going into this. I would expect Blue White Control and Esper midrange and Boros Convoke to be the level 0 line. And I don't know. I feel like I would have thought that this only had a good matchup against two of them, one of them being Esper. And this deck was trucking. I was impressed. Abe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the addition of Bronco to the Golgari shell like really complemented Mosswood Dread Knight well, and Mosswood Dread Knight I think was one of the like biggest draws to playing a deck like Golgari. And once you're in a deck that's looking to just increment its way ahead, right? Trudge ahead one card at a time while applying pressure, like you're saying, Spencer, like cards like Duress are getting better. And the more that, I mean, decks like Blue-White Control get the depth with 3-year standard to have, you know, a breadth of answers they can play and a bunch of ways to interact with 2 mana that bring those archetypes kind of back to life in a way they hadn't been in standard in years, you know, it really adds up. And yeah, it's really cool to see decks that are very simple in concept and how they work be really dynamic in how they're built, and be able to compete with decks that are really dynamic in concept and complicated in how they play. And for all of those to be represented in the standard format, like I think this is a perfect example of you can just show up and play black-green mid-range at the Pro Tour and do well. You don't have to be doing anything very cute either. You just need to be playing a mid-range deck with a list that makes sense and playing it well. And that's a good decision. That's a decision that some of the best players in the world chose to make for this tournament and, you know, had some good success with.
Yeah, I'm really glad you highlighted this deck. I think it is very good. And, you know, definitely like kind of a quiet winner, I think, from this weekend. One thing I do want to say, like, I really like the Duresses with Karavek, I believe is how you say this man's name, the Punisher. Like being able to sort of like use your Duresses on your opponent, like in their draw step, kill something, then duress them again. They're like in their draw step there is so powerful. We've seen that in Pioneer already with Thought Season, the Waste Not deck. That just having this as a 1-up gives you that, once again, that critical strike. And I think also Duresses in the main deck, like I think if I was going to play an RCQ tomorrow or whatever, I'd probably play at least like 1 or 2. But like in a open decklist format like this, you just get to know like how strong your Duress is, and you know, like, and if you're on the play against Convoke, for example, and they mulligan to 5, you know, and like you're like looking at your 6, it's like, well, I've got like a Duress, a kill spell, Dread 9, 3 lands. Their best draws all involve having a non-creature spell. I'm just going to play this Duress on turn 1, you know, or like turn 2 if I'm on the play, right? Like that kind of information really helps with these sort of decks too. And, you know, like we mentioned, a lot of the best players in the world, you know, Matt Sperling, Reed Duke, Sam Pardee all played this deck, and they are really good at making those sort of decisions. And it's cool to see cards like Pillage Jabog make it.
Let's talk about the data really quick. Kind of looking over the win percentages. Some of these are such small sample sizes. How much can you really gain from this? What can you take from the data from this event, Mason?
I mean, I think the biggest thing to me is that Standard is incredibly healthy. The format is super diverse. And if you're preparing for the RC, you need to be prepared for like a lot of these top decks. Like people are going to so no matter what, between now and like the end of May, so until June, I think you should just like expecting a good number of people to play Domain, right? Like if you're playing the Canadian RC this weekend, people are going to play Domain at the Pro Tour, despite the data not looking that like you should. It just won, and people like decks that win. But like you have to be ready for like these analyst decks from the Jund style Abe talked about to the Teamer one that top aided. You have to be prepared for these like black interactive decks from the Orzhov to the Golgari to the Esper mid range. You have to be able to fight over those decks, and a lot of them play pretty differently. The cards that are good against Esper aren't always so good against Golgari. And then I think the Control and the Legends deck, you just have to be able to like fight all these things and keep stuff in mind and try and figure out what is the best thing to fight on the given weekend, because it is really hard to be able to fight all that. I just covered like 7 decks. I think they're all good choices.
Dude, we didn't even talk about the Azorius Artifacts deck. Have either of you played against that yet?
No, I haven't.
I have not.
I got bodied by it. Yeah.
I like the Orzhov Bronco deck. That deck was sweet.
Yeah, I think Bronco just sick. I'm a huge fan of horses. If you try to get me on a snake horse, I'd be like, that's another Cowboys job. That's not for me.
That snake part really doing some heavy lifts in there.
I mean, the scales just seem like that chafing would be so bad. And like, I don't know how many horses you've ridden, Mason, but like, you know,
a lot.
It's already like, not the greatest for the chafing.
Yeah. You just got
Abe's like making
Paul Mason, Patrick Chafin over there. Riding the Bronco. That's next level.
I got Bronco on my Pioneer deck. I'm doing some great
No, I think that, like, for me, like, the data just says that there's, I don't know, like 9, 10 plus good decks in Standard. I mean, there's so many decks represented in this data, and, like, I don't know, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them had winning records at the Pro Tour.
I mean, personally, what I take away from not only just the data, but also the Pro Tour in general, was that the players who succeeded were ones who I think of as ones who put in a ton of work in the format and are really familiar with it. I think because of the breadth of Standard and how much play there is in all the games you'll play, this is a format where if you there's so many reasonable decks. I mean, Esper is, I think, the best of the reasonable decks, but there are so many reasonable decks you can play that if you have a mastery of any of them or any of them really, really speak to you and they're in your play style and you have the time to put in the work and play them, they are very viable choices. Will the metagame shift and people build their decks to be better against certain things and worse against others? Of course. You know, that's magic. That's metagaming. That's what the whole thing is. But of all the decks you pick, none of these are flashes in the pan that are going to go away tomorrow. None of them are going to be archetypes that you settle on today and say, okay, this is one of my top decks going into my RC or into, you know, whatever event you're playing, and go, oh, I hate that I chose this, now I'm stuck. You know, the decks are all really, really close in their playability, and the players who succeeded had the best grasp on that and had the most comfort with their archetype. So, like, data aside, like win rates aside, because there's so much that goes into that, and the samples, even at the Pro Tour level, are still quite small. Like, what it actually says and what the results actually say to me is playing the format and winning in the format, there's a large correlation to that. If you're really getting engaged and understanding all your matchups and, like, deeply understanding the breadth, that's when you have the most success.
We kind of already talked about this, but just kind of to hammer home, Mason, how do we think that this PT is going to impact the metagame for the RCs? I mean, you talked about domain, but is there anything else you want to highlight?
I mean, I think all these decks are going to be well represented. I think everything Abe just said really kind of hits at home for me, so there's not much to add. I will say that I think the RCs are going to, like, really get people anxious, if that makes sense. Like, if you are in the Dallas RC, right, for the United States here, you have about 4 weeks before your event, and Canada's having one this weekend. And those results are going to be the first results, obviously, after the Pro Tour, you know, and they're going to, like, greatly affect things and people's perception, and people are going to be in a mad dash because all these decks, like Abe just said, are so good. They are reasonable. They are powerful. And I think really what matters more than anything is playing your game really well and just making sure that you're not playing the, like, deck that's, like, a week behind fighting the wrong fights. You know, you just need to sort of stay in tune and playing good, clean Magic, and that's all you can do, and make sure you're just not fighting the wrong fights.
Awesome. That's going to do it for this. Let us know in the comments, like, what you're thinking about for Standard, or if you have any questions about Standard. Let's move on to our Patreon question. Why don't you take it away, Abe?
Yeah, so this week's Patreon question comes from Dexagos, aka Big Dax, in the Discord. Thanks to Spencer. And Dexagos asks, what do you do in the off-season that benefits your Magic? The time between RSQ seasons for me is working on the next format. What do you do when you feel like you've picked a solid deck and are solid on that deck?
I don't know. I feel like I've been in the off-season for so long because I, like, ditched out on the last 2 or 3 RCQ seasons. But I think that, like, you know, if you've already qualified, or if you have time, you know, between a long gap between RCQ seasons, I honestly think that I'll tell you what I'm going to do moving forward. As I look towards Magic, you know, now that I'm more stable in my job, I'm probably just going to play more challenges, and treat challenges like RCQ weekends whenever I don't have family stuff. I know that's what former coach of the show Quentin does. That has really helped him in a lot of ways. You can just continue to play, matches of Magic that matter all the time. Put yourself in situations that you care about your matches, and really flex those muscles. Now, if it's non-Magic stuff that I would do, it would probably be like process-oriented stuff, like making this show better and like how making a better process for it and things like that, or things around the house that I can do better, stuff like that. Setting up a system that makes things more efficient on my time, and then also that flexes like the muscles of, how do I maximize the time that I have in Magic. So that'd be my answer. What about you, Abe?
Yeah, so I mean, I do typically two things during either you can call them off seasons or like either natural lulls. Like, I mean, up until this set came out, it was like Pioneer's kind of the same place as it was for the Pro Tour, and then Modern is kind of waiting for Modern Horizons 3, and Standard is waiting for the new set. Those kind of things happen all the time, and especially if you're someone who doesn't play all three major constructed formats, which is a lot of players, that can be like a huge thing. I'm either typically resting, or if I've gotten to the point, or like I'm settling on a deck. Once I've settled on a deck, typically what I'll do if I've picked a solid deck and feel solid on that deck is I will just go and play and learn another deck. So I think that a lot of the time, like especially over the course of like a season, or if I just want to really succeed in one event for that format, or it's a format that I know is going to be relevant again in the future, right? Like in Pioneer, I've been spending a lot of time playing more Arclight Phoenix, not because I really want to play Arclight Phoenix right now, but because I'm accepting that I think it's going to be one of the best decks in the format, like for a long time, and so I should really get my reps in now and understand what the Boogeyman is doing, right? Like there's plenty of ways and opportunities, even in just supporting your goals that you have for the short term once you've picked the deck you want to play and what your plans are and everything like that, but going through and saying, okay, what's the next thing I can learn, and continuing to just identify another area where you can grow and learn a new skill and doing that.
Yeah, I have been playing a lot of Pioneer. I've already qualified for this RC, and just been still playing Pioneer, kind of like what Abe was saying, like the stuff will carry on long term, so I've been trying to do that. I think in general, the thing I always tell people is like, if you're wanting to improve, you should do the same things you're normally doing, right? Like you should be working on your fundamentals, you should be working on attacking and blocking, learning about the meta game, like sideboarding, deck construction. These sort of things are the things that matter. And you should be like learning Magic, not learning a format. Learning a format is not a successful way to queue for the RC. Successful way to queue for the RC is to learn Magic and then, make good decisions in the RCQ format. Like when people are just constantly chasing the dog of like, oh, I've got to learn this new deck, I got to do this thing, and they're not like working on their fundamentals, that is where they end up like tired, exhausted, and unsuccessful. So my suggestion to you would be to continue doing what you should be doing, and going forward with that is fine. And sometimes that is more targeted practice, but you should be focusing on the fundamentals.
All right, that is going to do it. If you want to ask a Patreon question, go to patreon.com/ccmc. Become a patron of $5 or more, and you too get access to the Patreon questions. Let's wrap up the show. You can join the conversation in the public Discord. That's the He's Game Media Discord for all of our shows, as well as the Patreon Discord. You get access to that. You become on a platinum level, platinum level subscriber. Head on over at patreon.com/ccmtg. And then I just want to thank people about like the YouTube comments and all that's been going on. I know that I've been pushing that really hard. If you haven't noticed, but we actually like had a huge boost in subscribers, and we passed 2,000. And I just want to congratulate Ava Mason. That's something I remember when we hit 1,500 like a while ago, and like seeing it grow through mostly the listeners. It really is. The listeners leaving the comments, hitting the subscribe button, saving those baby kangaroos. That does it. There's that's it. Like it's a self-feeding machine. So if you want to continue to see us do awesome things, leaving a comment, hitting that like button it really helps more than anything else. So, and then you can check us out on Twitter at CCMTG. And where can people find you, Abe?
People can find me over at twitter.com/more nothings.
Dude, you're so sweet to me. I'm like, hey, I want this. And you're like, here.
I got you, fam.
I have it. So, for those who don't know, Abe posts a new song every single day. And I was like, hey, man, we haven't had pop punk in a while. And then he, posts a pop punk song. And then, 3 days later, posts Shake It by Metro Station. It's like, all right, we're just doing, all Spencer stuff now.
We got to pander to the audience, They get what they want.
Yeah. I saw Metro Station live, but Cyrus was actually sick. So Shake It was done by one person, which is a little interesting. Actually,
sounds like a weird vibe.
My first date with my wife was this concert, I'll tell people. It was All Time Low, Metro Station, Hey Monday, Fall Out Boy, and Cobra Starship. It was a pop punk lover's dream.
That is a raw XD lineup if I've ever seen one.
Pretty freaking amazing.
I knew 2 out of 5.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All Time Low and Fall Out Boy?
Nope. Starships.
Cobra Starship, you knew?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
You probably know All Time Low songs for what it's worth.
I probably do, yeah. Well, I know because Nicki Minaj is the song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get you there one day, Mason.
That's not bad, though.
Emo Mason will ride again.
It's not bad. Anyway, where can people find you, man? There's a clip of I think it's episode 200 where I'm like, where can people find you? To Casey, who was one of the former hosts, and Casey's like, you don't need to find me. And Mason does his dolphin laugh, and I crack up. I think it's the funniest laugh in the whole world. And every time he does it, I have to hold back laughter because he sounds like a dolphin, and it's so cute.
Anyways, you can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can find me over on YouTube. Hold. Let me pull it up actually so I can make sure I got this.
If you're on YouTube, it's linked for what it's worth.
Oh, is it? Nice. It's there. Mason Clark on YouTube. It's the one that looks like me. I am doing weekly videos. I am now sponsored by Daybreak in the creative programming thingy. And so I'm going to be doing more moto videos. I have a Demonic Pack video up. I'm trying some gameplay review stuff that I'm editing right now. We're going to be doing a lot of different things there. So we're trying to put some more time into that content. So if you're looking for some YouTube stuff, I've heard people say they want that. It's going to be there as well, as long as, this podcast, which you can find if you're here, there. And then if you want to reach out for coaching, I still have some slots. I got some messages from people about last week, or maybe I guess 2 weeks ago, technically. I mentioned how in May, things are going to start slowing down a lot. And that is true. But it is like stopping a train. It takes some time. And so, things long-term are going to be much slower when it comes to coaching, but I'm still going to be taking people on. So if you want to get coaching, you might just have a bit more of a lag time between starting and reaching out, where before it's kind of 3 or 4 days. So feel free to reach out to me on that Twitter once again, Mason E. Clark, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. And that's all there is.
And you can find me at He's a Game on Twitter. You can find me every week on the wonderful Need to Nerd podcast. I don't know if it'll be up before or after this one, but this week we cover Wish, the new Disney movie for the 100-year celebration. My family loves it, and I was really excited to talk about it. And then I also just posted a new specialty podcast, a podcast about always improving in Smash. And then Constructed Clash will be starting again either this week or next week, and that'll be here on the YouTube channel. But yeah, that's kind of the stuff that I'm doing. What you learn on the show this week, Mason?
I learned that Spencer really likes my laugh.
Dude, it's so great. It's honestly there's some things that are just unique about people, right? And I think that one of the things that makes us happier is finding love in the uniqueness of people. And I love your laugh because it's so genuine. Like,
Mhm.
and I love that. I don't know. I learned what the Punisher does. So, whenever you commit a crime, exile up to one target black card from your graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy. If you do, you lose 2 life. This seems busted.
It's very good.
Yeah, this seems like a good, healthy time of Magic.
Yeah, I had never actually encountered or thought of the crime you and your draw step, cast my discard spell, but
A little
pretty clean.
tidbit. There was a Moto update that was like due to the increase in crimes as like the first line, but it was talking about Unlimited and like the way that crime worked, and like it was such a funny first line to read because you're like, wait, what's happening?
It's really, I gotta say, like, I think the Waste Not, I think we talked about it on the show, but I don't know. I don't really like Waste Not, but the core idea of like black interaction, I do like. And that card in that deck is like one of the like strongest things about it. Just getting to reuse your spells, because so many of the black cards, right? Like you lose card advantage, but this card like lets you reuse them, especially your cheap spells. So I really like that card a lot. I think it's very good.
Dude, for what it's worth, if anybody's going to play the Gruul Slingshot deck or Quick Shot, what is it called?
Slick Shot.
Slick Shot.
It's the Slick Shot show off.
Yeah, that matchup's really bad. Like really, really, really bad. The card, I mean, I said just the card Mind Draw is actually just like pretty insane against you. Like you actually really need your resources in that deck. And man, oh man, when you get Mind Draw, you're like, oh, this is actually so bad. That was like minus so much damage.
I may be running hot, but I think I have not lost to a black X mid-range deck.
It's the only one I've lost to, and it's only because of that card. We'll talk. We'll talk. I would be interested to hear that. What'd you learn this week, Gabe?
I don't know, Mason rode horses?
Dude, I knew you were going to say that. The face you made when he said that, I also was like, you did? Like,
yeah.
I mean, he's in Tennessee.
I almost didn't believe him. I was waiting for the punchline. But unlike Cobra Starship, we didn't get one.
No, it's true. Like my grandparents own a farm, and my uncle has a house on the farm too. And they like raise horses is one of the things, and like ride horses. And so I've like ridden horses and know how to like take care of it and all that sort of stuff.
You know how to yeehaw or two?
Mm-hmm.
Dude,
I'm pretty good at riding a horse.
I'm trained. I'm trained Western and English, so I didn't know we had other equestrians on the podcast.
Horse Girl podcast starring Mason and Spencer.
Dude, I assume you only ride Western in Tennessee, though.
It's in Georgia. I don't even know what that means. I just know how to get on the horse.
Okay. I
get on the horse. I can make the horse go forward. The horse likes me. I like the horse. I know how to take care of the horse.
Dude.
I know how to calm the horse down. I'm the horse whisperer.
It is my life goal to own a horse. Like that is literally like my number one goal in life. Anyway, if you want to listen to the Mason Spencer Horse Girl podcast, leave a comment, and we'll see you guys all next week with another episode of CCMTG.